Zowie should take notes. This is the Vaxee XC wireless, Vaxee's first ever attempt at a wireless gaming mouse, and it's actually quite good. Let's start off with the shape because that is king, and the shape summed up quickly is basically a G Pro X Superlight but lower and wider. It shares a lot of similar characteristics to the G Pro that many people are familiar with, and actually works for similar hand sizes in my opinion as the G Pro. It has a very centered hump that's kind of extended down the middle. It has gentle grooves on the sides for your thumb, forefinger, pinky, as well as gentle grooves in the clicks for your fingers to click. It also has a very puffy round shape just like the G Pro does, and because it's lower but wider than the G Pro, it actually works out to a similar volume and should work for similar hand sizes. But there are some significant improvements or deprovements, subjective, I know, to the shape of the Vaxee XC wireless compared to a G Pro that you might like or hate. So the first thing that you definitely notice is obviously the fact that it's lower, and for me this is a great improvement since I always found the G Pro to be too high and kind of fills out my palm a little too much. Another thing you notice is that the clicks are a lot lower than the G Pro, so if you're the kind of person who clicks like this and find clicking the high click position on the G Pro very uncomfortable, you'll enjoy the Vaxee XC quite a bit more. As a result, I find myself really liking the XE shape. In fact, I almost considered using this as my daily driver. My only problem is it's a little too heavy at 75 grams, but more on that in a bit. Overall though, the shape is really good, and I would actually say that this shape really feels like a G Pro for people who don't like tall and narrow gaming mice. In terms of size recommendations, my 19cm by 10cm hands have no problem palm gripping and claw gripping this shape whatsoever. And I would say that if you're claw gripping this mouse, a lot of hand sizes and most average hand sizes should have no problems with this mouse shape. I would say about 17 to 21, 22cm long hands will have no problem claw gripping this. But if you're palm gripping this mouse, I would definitely not recommend palm gripping this if your hands are above 20 centimeters, because my hands at 19cm are almost too big to palm grip the Vaxee XC comfortably. And if you're fingertip gripping this mouse, just don't. It's too big and not designed for that, and the clicks are not really evenly tensioned throughout. So if you're fingertip gripping and clicking from the back of the clicks, you probably will not have a great time. Which leads me on obviously to the clicks. As I said, they're not really evenly tensioned throughout, but if you have a claw or palm grip and you're clicking in towards the front of the clicks, the front 2/3 of the clicks, you'll be fine and find them to be pretty nice. But if you're clicking all the way at the back, it's going to be pretty uncomfortable. Overall, the clicks are pretty fine. I think they're kind of stiff for my liking, and they do have quite a bit of spongy post travel. But considering Vaxee's target audience is Zowie fans and Counter-Strike players who are more familiar with older gaming mice, this actually feels a lot like a improved Zowie EC click, so I have no qualms about it. Also, I do find that the Spongy Bottom Out does feel really good when pressing your mouse down hard when you're trying to control spray patterns in a game like Valorant or Counter-Strike. Now obviously all this is subjective whether you like a post travel that's spongy or not, but fret not about pre-travel because there's basically none. As for the scroll wheel, it's pretty good. You can bunny hop no problems with it. It's rubberized. The thumb buttons are also pretty good. They're quite light. They're not the high-pitched, crisp sounding thumb buttons. They're more of like a thocky sounding one, but they have basically zero post travel and are not wobbly unlike another mouse. Review soon. A thing that I absolutely love about this mouse though is the coating. It is one of the best coatings I've used on a modern gaming mouse. It's kind of like an in-between a gloss and a matte coating, and it feels really nice. Now it's not really a coating, it's more like a finish of the plastic, but it's a very nice finish that feels extremely grippy. Now if your hands have zero finger oils and are super clean and you pick them up, it's gonna feel really slippery. But the moment there are some finger oils that come out in your hand or like sweaty palms and things, you actually find that this mouse becomes very grippy and basically sticks to your fingers, which is excellent. This means you don't have to use grip tape with this mouse at all. It's not a compulsory thing, unlike a lot of these modern gaming mice that are coming out from Lamzu or Razer, where it's so slippery you kind of have to use grip tape. If not, it's not a nice experience. On the bottom of the mouse, you find two massive mice feet, which I personally actually don't like that much, since it makes this mouse very grippy on my Artisan Raiden FX mousepad. But it does result in a very consistent tracking experience over any mousepad that I've used it on, and it feels really nice if you're trying trying to stop from a very fast flick. It also adds a lot of stability since there's so much surface area holding the mouse up, but I personally would like if Vaxee could include some smaller mice feet in the box as well, so for people who prefer lower friction and less mice feet, they can get that as an option. One interesting thing about these mice feet though is while it's more friction than my Razer Viper V2 Pro or my Artisan Raiden FX mousepad, it actually feels more slippery and lower friction on my QCK than my Viper, which is pretty peculiar, but I don't understand physics and material science enough to explain why it feels like more friction on one mousepad, but less friction on the other. Perhaps this has to do with how hard the mousepad is. My Artisan Raiden is a ultra soft mousepad, and the extra weight is making it feel slower than my Viper. Which leads me on to the weight. So this mouse is 75 grams, which is actually the reason I can't really use this as my daily driver. Before you call me weak for complaining about 15 grams, I'm not complaining. 75 grams is actually light and perfectly fine for most people, but for someone who really uses his forearms all the time, because I use my forearms in the gym, I use my forearms carrying heavy cameras, I use my forearms to game, I use my forearms to type scripts. It's very important for me that I avoid RSI and use as light and as comfortable of a gaming mouse as possible. While this shape of this mouse is more comfortable in my hands than a Viper, it is definitely more tiring to game after 2 to 3 hours than on the Viper, so as a result, it can't be my daily driver. The 75 grams isn't all bad though. While it is heavier, it does make up for that weight by having really good build quality. This is one of the best built wireless gaming mice in this weight category I have ever tested. It's extremely sturdy, extremely rigid, and if I were to bring a mouse with me on a LAN tournament, this is probably the one I would bring because it's probably least likely to break since it's so sturdy and solid. Another thing that makes it very good for the LAN tournament is the fact that you don't need any gaming mouse software to use this mouse at all. In fact, that's not even an option. Vaxee does not make a software for the XE Wireless. Everything about this mouse can be controlled via the 3 buttons on the bottom, as well as a couple of kind of shortcuts and commands by pressing multiple buttons on the mice as well. Which actually leads me on to the programs of the mouse. So this mouse uses a 3395 sensor on the bottom, and that has motion sync, as almost every 3395 mouse has, as far as I'm aware. But more than that, Vaxee actually went the extra mile and developed their own alternative to motion sync called high speed mode. Apparently it uses similar principles and philosophies to motion sync and actually does a similar thing to motion sync to improve the precision and consistency of the tracking of your sensor, but apparently it does it even better than motion sync on the 3395 does, but it comes at the expense of battery life. Vaxee allows you to turn on motion sync or high speed mode individually, and you can actually turn on both of them at the same time, but Vaxee does not recommend you turn on both at the same time because there are supposedly some possible glitches and issues. They recommend you just leave it in high speed mode or motion sync, whichever you prefer, and leave it as such. With just motion sync, battery life is about 70 hours. With high speed mode, battery life is about 50 hours, and personally I have no problems with the battery life of this. I could easily game on this for a whole week and have no problems, so if you're concerned about that, don't worry. There's another thing that Vaxee released as well just a week after the launch of this gaming mouse called competitive firmware. Competitive firmware is basically like a stripped down firmware for this mouse that supposedly reduces latency and improves response times by basically getting rid of all the options to change settings on the mouse itself. So you can install competitive firmware, and if you don't like it, you can switch it back. Don't worry, it's not permanent. But what competitive firmware basically does is it disables the ability to switch between motion sync and high speed mode, instead leaving you locked in a competitive mode that is supposedly tinkered and optimized at the factory for people who don't really care about switching between these modes and are okay with sacrificing some extra battery life in the name for maximum performance and lowest latency. But you still retain the ability to change your DPI and your polling rate even in competitive firmware, so don't worry about that. But I really do like the fact that they released a special firmware just for super sweaty tryhards trying to min-max everything, because it shows how dedicated Vaxee is to their craft in making the optimum gaming mouse for sweaty CS tryhards. And last but not least, for the weight distribution of the XE Wireless, it's actually really good. It's extremely centered and doesn't feel like it's going to tip forward or tip backwards at any one point. But for some reason, the weight distribution, while being very good on the XE, does make the XE feel a little heavier than some other 75 gram mice I've used before, like the Razer Viper Ultimate. Perhaps this has to do with how tall the CG is, or just my grip in particular relative to this shape, but whatever it is, it still feels very balanced and it still feels like a light gaming mouse. Not as light as the cutting edge stuff like this, but light enough for most gamers. All in all then, should you buy the Vaxee XE Wireless? Well, it is definitely a good product, and for $120 it's pretty reasonably priced. It's by no means a cheap gaming mouse, but it's definitely still a very competitive product and isn't exorbitantly priced at the very least. It's got great build, innovative features, and a really nice shape that I think a lot of people would like. And while it's heavier than its competition, the fact that you don't have to use grip tape with it to still have a good grip. Also means that it does save a couple of grams on that. So either ways, good job Vaxee. It's a company I want to keep my eyes on and keep supporting because their products seem really, really good, and they seem to be listening to the community and actually trying their best to deliver the best product possible, which I definitely appreciate. And with that, thanks for watching, like and subscribe.